The crystal goblet shattered against the marble floor, red wine spreading across pristine white linen like blood across snow. Lady Charlotte Pemberton watched in horror as the burgundy liquid soaked the stranger's impeccably tailored evening coat. The man her father had introduced only as Mr. Reed, a business associate from the north. "Oh God! Oh God! I'm so terribly sorry," Charlotte gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as the entire dinner party fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her, 20 aristocratic faces registering shock, disapproval, and in her stepmother's case, barely concealed fury. The stranger stood slowly, wine dripping from his coat sleeve, and Charlotte finally looked up at his face. Dark eyes, storm gray and intense, met hers. Something flickered in those eyes, recognition, tenderness, pain, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "It's quite all right, Miss Pemberton," he said, his voice low and rich, with an accent that suggested education and privilege despite the simple introduction. "Accidents happen, but this was no accident." Charlotte had knocked the wine over deliberately, clumsily, desperately, because she'd overheard what no one thought she'd hear. That Mr. Reed, this quiet stranger with sad eyes, was about to make an offer for her hand. An arranged marriage, her father's solution to their mounting debts. And Charlotte Pemberton had spent 24 years avoiding exactly this fate. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the man standing before her, wine-soaked and patient, wasn't Mr. Reed at all. He was Alexander Thornfield, the Duke of Ashford, the most powerful nobleman in the north of England. And he'd been in love with her since they were both 8 years old. 12 hours earlier, Charlotte had been in her father's study, looking for a book, when she overheard a conversation that changed everything. "The girl doesn't know?" an unfamiliar male voice asked. "Charlotte doesn't need to know the details." Her father, Lord Edmund Pemberton, Earl of Hartwick, replied wearily. "She'll meet him at dinner tonight. If all goes well, we'll announce the engagement by month's end." Charlotte had frozen behind the heavy curtains, her heart hammering. "And if she refuses?" the stranger asked. "She won't refuse," her stepmother's voice, sharp as broken glass. "Charlotte is intelligent enough to understand reality. We're ruined, Mr. Whitmore. The estate is mortgaged beyond recovery. Her father's investments in those American railway schemes were catastrophic. Without this marriage, we'll lose everything." Charlotte's hands had clenched in her skirts. She'd suspected their financial situation was dire, but ruined? Mortgaged beyond recovery? "Is the Duke aware of your circumstances?" Mr. Whitmore asked. "He knows enough," her father said quietly. "He asked specifically about Charlotte. Wanted to know if she was available. I didn't question his interest. A duke's offer is not something one questions." "A duke?" Her stepmother's voice had sharpened with interest. "You said he was a businessman from the north. Alexander Thornfield prefers discretion. He's using the name Reed for the initial meeting. Wants to assess the situation before revealing his identity. Can't say I blame him. Marriage-minded young ladies can be rather aggressive when a duke is in play." Charlotte had fled the study, her mind reeling. An arranged marriage to a stranger, a duke in disguise, her family's ruin. By dinner time, she'd formulated her plan. She would make herself so thoroughly undesirable that no man, duke or otherwise, would want to marry her. Hence the accidental wine spill, the first salvo in what she intended to be a campaign of social disaster. Now, standing in the dining room with wine pooling at her feet and the mysterious Mr. Reed watching her with those impossibly gentle eyes, Charlotte felt the first stirring of doubt. Because he wasn't angry, he wasn't disgusted or dismissive. He looked at her like she was precious, like spilling wine on him was somehow endearing rather than catastrophic. "Perhaps we should continue this dinner another evening," her stepmother said tightly, moving to usher the guest away. "Mr. Reed, please accept our sincerest apologies for my stepdaughter's clumsiness." "No need," Alexander said, his eyes never leaving Charlotte's face. "I'd like to stay, if the offer still stands. A bit of wine won't harm me." Charlotte's father looked relieved. Her stepmother looked suspicious. Charlotte felt something she couldn't quite name, a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her planned sabotage. Of course, her father said quickly. Charlotte, apologize properly to Mr. Reed. Then go change. We'll hold dinner for you. As Charlotte fled the room, she heard Alexander's voice behind her. So quiet she almost missed it. Still causing chaos? Aren't you Lottie? Lottie. No one had called her that in 16 years. Not since. But no, that was impossible. Charlotte returned to dinner in a different dress, her mind racing. That name, Lottie. Only one person had ever called her that. Alexander Thornfield, the Duke's son from the neighboring estate where she'd spent childhood summers before her mother died, before everything changed. But Alexander had been a boy, 8 years old to her 8 years old, with dark curls and scraped knees and an obsession with collecting beetles. They'd been inseparable that one golden summer, running wild through gardens and meadows, making elaborate plans to build a fortress and live there forever, just the two of them, away from adults and rules and expectations. Then her mother died. Charlotte and her father had moved to London. She'd never returned to Hartwick Hall, never seen the Thornfield estate again. She'd assumed Alexander had forgotten her, as children do. This Mr. Reed couldn't possibly be that Alexander. The Duke of Ashford was a reclusive figure, rarely seen in London society, known for his vast wealth and his complete disinterest in marriage. Newspapers called him the Frozen Duke because of his legendary coldness toward ambitious mothers and their daughters. But as she slipped back into the dining room, as those storm-gray eyes found hers immediately, Charlotte's certainty wavered. "Ah, Charlotte," her father said with forced cheer. "Much better. Mr. Reed was just telling us about his estates in Yorkshire." Charlotte took her seat across from the stranger and forced herself to look at him properly. He was perhaps 32, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar despite obvious attempts to tame it. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic lines, handsome in a severe, almost forbidding way. But those eyes, those gray eyes that watched her with such focused intensity, carried something she recognized. Sadness, loneliness, the same expression she'd seen in her own mirror every morning for years. "Miss Pemberton," Alexander said formally as footmen served the soup course. "Your father mentioned you're an accomplished artist." Charlotte nearly laughed. The accomplishment was generous. She drew obsessively, had since childhood, but her stepmother considered it an unseemly hobby for a lady. "I sketch occasionally, Mr. Reed. Nothing of consequence." "I disagree." His voice was soft. "I think art is always consequential when it captures truth." The conversation around them continued, her father and stepmother steering topics toward safe, boring subjects. But Charlotte felt Alexander's attention on her like a physical weight. "Do you ride, Miss Pemberton?" he asked during the fish course. "Not in years," Charlotte admitted. "We don't keep horses in London." Something flickered in his expression. "That's a shame. I remember." He stopped abruptly. "That is, riding is said to be excellent exercise." Charlotte's hands tightened on her fork. He remembered. He remembered something about her and riding. Suddenly she was 8 years old again, on a fat pony named Buttercup, Alexander beside her on an equally round creature called Thunder. They'd raced through fields, screaming with laughter, until they'd both fallen off and rolled in the grass, covered in dirt and joy. "You used to draw horses," Alexander said quietly, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "Pages and pages of horses. You said when you grew up you'd have 100 of them." Charlotte's breath caught. "How do you?" "The venison is excellent," her stepmother interrupted loudly, shooting Charlotte a warning look. "Mr. Reed, you must tell us more about your business ventures." The moment shattered. Alexander turned his attention to her stepmother, answering questions about Yorkshire estates and investments with practiced ease. But Charlotte could barely breathe. It was him. It was Alexander, the boy from that golden summer. The Duke of Ashford, sitting at her father's table, pretending to be someone else. But why? Why hide his identity? Why seek her out after 16 years? After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing room while the men remained with their port. Charlotte's stepmother immediately pounced. "What did Mr. Reed say to you?" she demanded. During the venison course, he leaned quite close. "What were you discussing?" "Horses," Charlotte said honestly. "I used to ride as a child." Her stepmother's eyes narrowed. "You're to be charming, Charlotte. Pleasant. Agreeable. This match is crucial for our survival. Do you understand?" "I understand that you want me to marry a stranger for money," Charlotte said quietly. "I want you to do your duty to your family," her stepmother snapped. "Your father has been more than generous, allowing you 3 seasons, no prospects, refusing perfectly acceptable offers because you found them uninspiring. Well, inspiration doesn't pay debts, Charlotte. Mr. Reed is your last chance." When the men rejoined them, Charlotte's father suggested music. Her stepmother immediately positioned herself at the piano, playing a complex piece designed to showcase her own accomplishment rather than entertaining the guest. Alexander moved to stand beside the windows, staring out at the darkened London street. Charlotte found herself drawn to him despite her better judgment. "Why are you here?" she asked quietly, positioning herself so her stepmother couldn't see them speaking. "Why pretend to be someone you're not?" He turned slowly, those gray eyes holding hers. "How did you know?" "You called me Lottie. Only one person ever called me that." A smile ghosted across his face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "You haven't changed as much as you think. Still direct. Still brave enough to say what you're thinking." "I'm not brave," Charlotte said bitterly. "I'm desperate. I heard my father talking. I know why you're here. I know what's expected." "What do you think is expected?" "An arranged marriage. You need a wife. My father needs money. It's neat and tidy." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "What if I told you I didn't come here because of your father's debts?" "Then why?" "Because 16 years ago I made a promise to an 8-year-old girl. I told her that someday, when we were grown up, I'd come back for her. I'd find her and we'd build that fortress together, just like we planned." Charlotte's throat tightened. "We were children. Children make promises they can't keep. I kept mine." His voice was fierce, low, meant only for her. "I've kept it for 16 years, Charlotte. I became everything I needed to become so that when I finally found you again, I'd be worthy of you." "You're a duke," she whispered. "How could you possibly need to prove your worth?" "Because being a duke means nothing if the woman you love thinks you're only offering a transaction." The world tilted. "The woman you love." "You don't know me," Charlotte managed. "We were friends for 1 summer. You can't possibly. I know you draw horses when you're anxious. I know you read books hidden under your blanket at night because you can't sleep without stories. I know you hate embroidery and love thunderstorms and once convinced me to eat an entire bowl of gooseberries until we were both sick." Each detail hit like an arrow. Memories she'd buried deep. That golden summer before loss and grief reshaped her world. "I know," Alexander continued, his voice roughening with emotion, "that you deserved better than what life gave you. Your mother's death, your father's remarriage, being forced into a life you never wanted. And I know that every year I've watched you from afar, 3 London seasons where you smiled politely and danced with vapid aristocrats who didn't deserve you. It killed me not to approach you, not to claim you. Why didn't you?" The question emerged as barely a whisper. "Because I wanted you to choose me. Not because your father arranged it. Not because you needed financial security. I wanted you to look at me and remember that summer. Remember us, and choose me anyway." Charlotte stared at him. This man who was both stranger and childhood friend, duke and disguised businessman. Everything she'd feared and somehow everything she'd dreamed of. "The wine," she said suddenly. "I spilled it on purpose. I was trying to ruin the dinner to make you leave." "I know. You knew." A real smile this time, warm and devastating. "Charlotte, you bit your lip 3 times, adjusted your napkin 4 times, and knocked your fork off the table twice before you finally worked up the courage to grab that wine glass. You're many things, but a good actress isn't one of them." Despite everything, Charlotte laughed. It emerged strangled, half hysterical, but real. I'm trying to sabotage my own arranged marriage and you're just letting me? I'm not arranging anything, Alexander said firmly. Yes, I approached your father. Yes, I offered to help with his debts in exchange for permission to court you. But Charlotte, I meant court. Not a trap. Not purchased. I want the chance to know you again. For you to know me. And at the end of it, if you decide you don't want me, I'll walk away. Just like that. Just like that. Though I hope you won't. He held her gaze, something vulnerable and fierce in his expression. I've loved you for 16 years. I can be patient a little while longer. From across the room, her stepmother's voice cut through the moment. Charlotte, come sit down. You're being frightfully rude. Monopolizing Mr. Reed's attention. Charlotte looked at Alexander, at this man who'd kept a child's promise for 16 years, who'd become a duke and still remembered a girl who drew horses and ate too many gooseberries. Tomorrow, she said quietly. Come calling tomorrow. And this time, tell me the truth about everything. His smile could have powered every gas lamp in London. Tomorrow, then. Your Grace. She froze. You heard. I hear everything when it comes to you, Lottie. I always have. Alexander arrived at precisely 2 o'clock the following afternoon, announced properly this time as His Grace, the Duke of Ashford. Charlotte watched from the drawing-room window as her stepmother nearly fainted from shock. The Duke of Ashford. The butler intoned as Alexander entered, and Charlotte had to suppress a smile at her stepmother's expression. A tortured mixture of delight at having a duke in her drawing room and fury that Charlotte had somehow known first. Your Grace, her father said, bowing deeply. This is an unexpected honor. I apologize for the deception last night, Alexander said smoothly. I prefer to assess potential business arrangements without the complication of my title preceding me. However, Miss Pemberton correctly deduced my identity, and I see no reason to continue the pretense. Charlotte's stepmother gaped like a fish. Charlotte knew? But she said. We met as children, Charlotte said calmly, enjoying her stepmother's shock more than she should. One summer at Hartwick Hall before my mother passed. I recognized His Grace despite his discretion. It wasn't entirely a lie. She had recognized him, eventually. I've come to request permission to take Miss Pemberton driving in Hyde Park, Alexander said, addressing her father formally. With appropriate chaperonage, of course. Her father looked between them, clearly trying to reconcile the businessman from last night with the Duke standing before him. Of course, Your Grace. Charlotte would be delighted. 20 minutes later, Charlotte found herself seated beside Alexander in an elegant open carriage. Her maid Martha perched on the rear-facing seat as chaperone, and London society spread before them like a stage set. Hyde Park at 4 o'clock, Charlotte observed. You do realize this is where everyone in London comes to see and be seen? That's rather the point, Alexander said, guiding his perfectly matched bays through the Stanhope Gate. I'm courting you, Charlotte. I want everyone to know it. Why? He glanced at her, surprised. Why do I want people to know? No. Why court me at all? You're a duke. You could have your pick of any woman in England. Beautiful, accomplished, wealthy women who would jump at the chance. Why pursue someone you haven't seen in 16 years? Someone whose family is financially ruined? Someone who spills wine on dinner guests? Alexander was quiet for a moment, navigating past Lord and Lady Pemberton's elaborate barouche. Several heads turned to stare at them. The reclusive Duke of Ashford, seen publicly with the Earl of Hartwick's unremarkable daughter. The gossip mills would be churning by evening. Do you remember what we promised each other that summer? He asked finally. Charlotte's throat tightened. We promised a lot of things. We were 8. We promised that when we grew up, we'd never be like the adults around us. Never cold or calculating or cruel. We'd build a home where people could be themselves, no pretending, no performing. Just honest and real and safe. The memory crashed over her with unexpected force. They'd been sitting in the hollow of an ancient oak tree, eating stolen biscuits from the kitchen, watching the adults at some tedious garden party below. They're all lying, 8-year-old Alexander had said seriously. Every single one. Saying nice things they don't mean, pretending to like each other when really they're just calculating who has more money or better connections. When I grow up, Charlotte had declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. I'll never lie. I'll say exactly what I think, always. When I grow up, Alexander had replied, I'll find people who are real like you, and I'll keep them close. No more fakery. No more games. They'd made a solemn pact, sealed with a handshake and more stolen biscuits, to be different from the disappointing adults surrounding them. I remember, Charlotte said quietly, pulling herself back to the present. But Alexander, we were children. Children can afford to be idealistic. Adults have responsibilities, expectations. Adults have choices, he interrupted. And I chose to keep that promise. I chose to build something real instead of accepting the artificial world we were born into. They'd reached the Serpentine now, the fashionable heart of Hyde Park where carriages moved in slow circuits designed to showcase their occupants. Charlotte recognized dozens of faces from her London seasons. Lady Pemberton, who'd cut her at last year's opera. Miss Catherine Worth, who'd once called her charmingly odd in a tone that meant the opposite. Lord Harrison, who'd danced with her once and spent the entire waltz looking over her shoulder for someone more interesting. All of them stared openly at the Duke of Ashford's carriage, at Charlotte seated beside him like she belonged there. This is going to cause talk, Charlotte murmured. Good. Let them talk. Alexander nodded politely to Lady Pemberton, who looked like she might fall out of her carriage. Charlotte, I need you to understand something. When I inherited the dukedom at 18, I had every ambitious mother in England throwing their daughters at me. Beautiful girls, accomplished girls, girls who simpered and flattered and agreed with everything I said. How terrible for you, Charlotte said dryly. He smiled slightly. It was terrible, because none of them were real. Every word was calculated, every gesture designed to ensnare a duke. I couldn't trust a single moment of it. Was she laughing at my joke because it was funny? Or because I was wealthy? Did she share my interest in agriculture? Or was she just pretending? So you became the frozen duke, Charlotte said, remembering the newspaper's descriptions. Cold and unapproachable, refusing all overtures. I became someone who'd learned that authentic connection was more valuable than any title or fortune. And for 14 years, I looked for someone who could see me as Alexander, not as the Duke of Ashford. He pulled the carriage to a stop beneath a large oak tree, far enough from the main circuit for privacy. Martha, bless her, discreetly turned her attention to examining her gloves. Then 3 years ago, Alexander continued, I attended a ball in London, the Westmoreland Summer Ball. I was there on business, planning to leave early as usual. And I saw you. Charlotte remembered that ball. She'd been 21, midway through her second season, already resigned to spinsterhood. She'd spent most of the evening in the library, hiding from her stepmother's matchmaking attempts. You were sitting in the window seat, Alexander said, his voice soft with memory, reading a book you'd clearly smuggled in, completely ignoring the festivities. Someone asked what you were reading, and you told them it was a treatise on agricultural reform. They laughed, thinking you were joking. But you weren't joking. Charlotte felt heat rise to her cheeks. I find crop rotation fascinating. The four-field system could revolutionize yields if properly implemented. She stopped, realizing what she'd revealed. You think I'm odd. I think you're magnificent, Alexander said simply. I stood in that doorway watching you defend four-field rotation to a man who thought women shouldn't have opinions about anything more complex than embroidery. And I knew. That's her. That's Lottie, all grown up. Still refusing to pretend. Still entirely, wonderfully herself. Why didn't you approach me? Because you were being aggressively courted by Lord Pemberton's son. I thought. He paused, something painful crossing his face. I thought perhaps you'd found happiness, that you'd moved on from our childhood promises. So I left. Lord Pemberton's son was a bore who only wanted me for my dowry, Charlotte said bluntly, which at the time still existed. I refused him. My stepmother didn't speak to me for a month. I know. I sent inquiries. Charlotte turned to stare at him. You sent inquiries? About me? I sent inquiries about everything concerning you, Alexander admitted. Every season, every suitor, every disappointed proposal. I told myself I was being cautious, making sure you were well. But truthfully, he met her eyes. I was waiting to see if anyone would be worthy of you. Waiting to see if you'd find someone who understood what they had. That's rather presumptuous, Charlotte said, but her voice lacked heat. It's obsessive and probably concerning, Alexander agreed. But Charlotte, I've loved you since we were 8 years old. Do you have any idea what that's like? To fall in love as a child and never fall out of it? To grow up and become exactly the person you thought that little girl deserved, only to watch from afar as she navigated a world that didn't appreciate her. Stop, Charlotte whispered. Please stop. Why? Because I can't think when you say things like that. Because my entire life, no one has ever. She struggled for words. No one has ever looked at me the way you're looking at me right now. Like I'm precious. Like I matter. You do matter, Alexander said fiercely. You matter more than anything. They sat in silence, the sounds of Hyde Park drifting around them. Carriage wheels on gravel, horses whickering, distant laughter. Charlotte's mind whirled with 16 years of loneliness, of being overlooked and undervalued, of believing she'd somehow failed at being a proper woman because she couldn't pretend to be vapid and agreeable. And here was Alexander, the Duke of Ashford, one of the most powerful men in England, telling her that her refusal to pretend was exactly what he loved most. I don't know how to do this, she finally admitted. I don't know how to court or be courted. Every suitor I've had wanted me to be someone else. Quieter, more agreeable, less opinionated. I don't know how to be that person. I don't want to be that person. Then don't be, Alexander said simply. Be exactly who you are. That's all I want. What if who I am isn't enough? The question emerged small and vulnerable, revealing fears she'd never spoken aloud. What if you're remembering an idealized childhood and the reality disappoints you? Alexander reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and took her hand. Even through their gloves, Charlotte felt the warmth of his touch. Charlotte, in the past 3 years, I've had reports about you from 3 different investigators. I know you sketch until 3 in the morning when you can't sleep. I know you volunteer at a charity school in Southwark teaching girls to read, which your stepmother forbids but you do anyway. I know you once punched your stepbrother in the nose for saying women shouldn't have opinions about politics. I know you memorized Wordsworth's entire collected works because the poetry makes you feel less alone. Charlotte's breath caught. That's invasive and creepy and I'm still here, Alexander interrupted gently. Knowing all of it. Loving all of it. You're not some idealized memory, Charlotte. You're a real, complex, occasionally prickly woman who argues about crop rotation and teaches children to read and refuses to be anything other than yourself. That's exactly what I want. Why? The question emerged as a whisper. Because, Alexander said, his gray eyes holding hers with devastating intensity, you're the only person in my entire life who's never wanted anything from me except friendship. When we were 8, you didn't care that I was the Duke's son. You cared that I could climb trees and tell stories and wasn't afraid of spiders. That summer was the only time in my life I've ever felt completely accepted for who I am rather than what I represent. He squeezed her hand gently. I've spent 16 years trying to recreate that feeling with someone else. It never worked. Because it wasn't just anyone, Charlotte. It was you. It's always been you. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. This is mad. We don't know each other anymore. We're strangers who shared one summer decades ago. Then let's stop being strangers, Alexander said. Give me time, Charlotte. Give me the chance to know you now as you are and let you know me. No pretending. No performing. Just honesty. And at the end of it? At the end of it, you decide. If you want me, I'm yours. If you don't, I'll help your father with his debts anyway and walk away. That's not fair trade, Charlotte protested. You'd be giving up everything for nothing. I'd be giving you freedom, Alexander corrected. That's worth everything. They sat in silence, Charlotte's hand still clasped in Alexander's, both of them aware of Martha's discreet presence behind them and the slowly circling carriages in the distance. "One condition," Charlotte said finally. "Anything. No more investigators. No more reports. If you want to know something about me, ask me directly." Alexander smiled, that same genuine warmth she remembered from childhood. "Agreed. Though I should warn you, I have 16 years' worth of questions." "I have a few myself," Charlotte admitted, starting with, "How did a boy who collected beetles become England's most reclusive duke?" "That," Alexander said, guiding his horses back toward the main circuit, "is a very long story involving tragedy, unwanted responsibility, and a deep conviction that every adult I knew was fundamentally miserable. I'll tell you all of it if you want, but perhaps not in Hyde Park with half of London watching." As they rejoined the fashionable parade, Charlotte was acutely aware of the stares following them. Lady Pemberton looked apoplectic. Miss Worth's mouth hung open in shock. Even Lord Harrison had stopped his carriage to gawk. "They're going to talk," Charlotte murmured. "Let them." Alexander nodded politely to a cluster of dowagers who looked ready to faint from curiosity. "By tomorrow, all of London will know the Duke of Ashford is courting you. Your stepmother will be simultaneously delighted and frustrated that you knew before she did. And you'll have marriage proposals from at least 3 more fortune hunters who suddenly find you fascinating because I do." "How reassuring," Charlotte said dryly. "I did promise honesty." Alexander glanced at her, his expression softening. "But Charlotte, I also promise protection. Anyone who's unkind to you answers to me now. Anyone who questions your worth answers to me. I'm not subtle about defending what's mine." "I'm not yours," Charlotte protested, but without much heat. "Not yet," Alexander agreed. "But I'm working on it." Despite herself, Charlotte smiled. For the first time in years, possibly since that golden summer 16 years ago, she felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Hope. Over the next fortnight, Alexander called on Charlotte every afternoon. They walked in the park, attended the opera, and took tea in her father's drawing room under her stepmother's watchful eye. And slowly, carefully, they began to piece together the years they'd lost. "Why did you never return to Hartwick Hall?" Alexander asked one afternoon as they strolled through Kensington Gardens, Martha trailing at a discreet distance. Charlotte was silent for a long moment, watching children play near the round pond. "After my mother died, my father couldn't bear it. Every room reminded him of her. So we moved to London, and he replaced her with your stepmother. Within a year." Charlotte couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "I was 9. I didn't understand why he needed someone new so quickly. Why her memory wasn't enough to keep him company." "Loss does strange things to people," Alexander said quietly. "My father died when I was 18. He fell from his horse during a hunt, broke his neck instantly. Everyone said I handled it remarkably well, that I transitioned to the dukedom with impressive maturity. But I didn't handle it at all. I buried myself in responsibility and duty and told myself that feeling nothing was the same as being strong." He paused beside a large oak tree. "It took me years to understand that grief doesn't have a timeline. That my father's death didn't become less painful just because I refused to acknowledge the pain." Charlotte studied his profile, seeing shadows she hadn't noticed before. "Is that why you became so reclusive?" "Partially, but mostly it was self-preservation." Alexander turned to face her. "After my father died, I became the most eligible bachelor in England overnight. Suddenly everyone wanted something from me: money, connection, position. Every conversation was a negotiation. Every smile was calculated. I couldn't trust anyone." "That sounds lonely." It was. His gray eyes held hers. "Until I saw you again. Until I remembered what it felt like to be around someone who didn't want anything from me except companionship." They walked on in comfortable silence, and Charlotte found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did around men. Alexander didn't expect her to simper or flatter. He asked her opinions and actually listened to her answers. When she'd expressed strong views about education reform yesterday, he'd engaged enthusiastically rather than looking uncomfortable. "Charlotte," Alexander said as they completed another circuit of the gardens, "I need to tell you something about your father's debts." Her stomach tightened. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that, without intervention, he'll lose Hartwick Hall within 6 months. The estate has been mortgaged 3 times over. Those American railway investments your stepmother mentioned? They were fraudulent schemes. Your father lost nearly everything." Charlotte felt sick. "Does he know?" "I think he's suspected for some time but couldn't bring himself to face reality. Men like your father, honorable, proud men, sometimes find it easier to hope than to confront uncomfortable truths." "And my stepmother?" Alexander's expression hardened. "Your stepmother has been systematically moving money out of the estate accounts and into her own name for the past 2 years. She knew the railway investments were failing and protected herself first." "That's theft," Charlotte gasped. "That's survival from her perspective, though I don't defend it." Alexander stopped walking, turning to face Charlotte directly. "I've already begun addressing the debts. Quietly, discreetly, in ways your father needn't know about unless absolutely necessary. Hartwick Hall is safe." "Why would you do that?" Charlotte demanded. "You said you'd help regardless of whether I chose you, but Alexander, that's an enormous amount of money. My father's debts aren't your responsibility." "You're my responsibility," Alexander said simply. "Or you will be if you'll have me. And I won't have you choosing me because your family needs financial rescue. I want you to choose me because you want me, not because you feel obligated." Charlotte stared at him, overwhelmed by the sheer scope of what he was offering. "That's not how this works. Courtship is supposed to be about compatibility and family alliance and I don't care about any of that," Alexander interrupted. "Charlotte, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. What I don't have is someone who looks at me and sees Alexander instead of your Grace. Someone who argues with me about crop rotation and teaches children to read and refuses to pretend to be something she's not." "You're romanticizing me," Charlotte protested, "making me into some ideal that can't possibly exist in reality." "Am I?" Alexander stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Tell me honestly, have I been wrong about anything? Do you not sketch until 3 in the morning? Do you not volunteer at that school in Southwark? Did you not punch your stepbrother for his political views?" "He said women were naturally inferior intellectually," Charlotte muttered. "He deserved it." Despite the gravity of their conversation, Alexander smiled. "Exactly my point. You're not some idealized fantasy, Charlotte. You're a real woman with strong convictions and a terrible temper and absolutely no patience for stupidity. That's exactly what I love about you." "You can't love me," Charlotte said desperately. "You don't know me well enough to love me." "I've known you for 16 years, Alexander countered. "Whether we've been in the same room or not, I've known you. Every investigator's report, every glimpse across a ballroom, every story your father told mine about his brilliant, difficult daughter. All of it built a picture of who you are. And yes, these past 2 weeks have confirmed everything I already knew. You're extraordinary, Charlotte. Why is that so hard for you to believe?" "Because no one else has ever believed it," Charlotte thought but didn't say. "Because her stepmother called her difficult and her father looked disappointed and every suitor who'd approached her had eventually decided she was too opinionated, too unconventional, too much." "What if I disappoint you?" she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "What if 6 months from now, you realize that being married to someone opinionated and argumentative is exhausting rather than charming?" Alexander reached out and gently took both her hands. "Propriety be damned. Charlotte, I've spent 16 years watching every perfect, accomplished, agreeable young lady in England try to catch my attention. Do you know what I felt? Nothing. Absolute nothing. They bore me senseless with their performance of femininity." He squeezed her hands gently. "But you make me feel alive, awake, like the world is interesting again. You challenge me and surprise me and make me want to be better than I am. That's not going to change in 6 months or 6 years or 60 years. Charlotte felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. This is happening too fast. We've only been courting for 2 weeks. We've been courting for 16 years, Alexander corrected with a slight smile. You just didn't know it. Despite herself, Charlotte laughed, a wet, slightly hysterical sound. That's still obsessive and concerning. I never claimed to be perfect. Alexander released her hands reluctantly as Martha cleared her throat in warning. They'd attracted attention from other park-goers. But Charlotte, I am patient. Take all the time you need to be sure. I'm not going anywhere. As they walked back toward her father's house, Charlotte's mind whirled with everything she'd learned. Alexander had been in love with her for 16 years. He'd resolved her father's debts without expectation of return. He found her argumentative nature charming rather than exhausting. It was too much, too perfect. Surely there had to be a catch. Alexander, she said as they reached her doorstep. What aren't you telling me? He looked surprised. What makes you think I'm hiding something? Because this all feels too perfect, too much like a fairy tale. The childhood friend returns, declares his undying love, and solves all problems with unlimited wealth. Real life doesn't work like that. There's always a complication. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his expression growing serious. You're right. There is something I haven't told you. Charlotte's stomach dropped. What? When we were children, when your mother died and you left Hartwick Hall, I was devastated. You were my only real friend, my only connection to anything genuine. And losing you so suddenly, with no explanation, no goodbye, it broke something in me. He met her eyes, and Charlotte saw old pain in those gray depths. I became someone who didn't let people close, who didn't trust easily, who assumed everyone wanted something from me because everyone always did. That's the complication, Charlotte. I'm not an easy man. I'm suspicious and guarded, and I've spent 16 years building walls around myself. But not around me, Charlotte said softly. Never around you. With you, I'm just Alexander. The boy who collected beetles and ate too many gooseberries and made ridiculous promises about building fortresses. He smiled slightly. But that boy comes with 16 years of accumulated damage. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand what you'd be taking on. I'm not Prince Charming. I'm a complicated, difficult man who happens to love you desperately. Charlotte looked at this man who'd kept a childhood promise for 16 years, who'd watched her from afar and never approached because he wanted her to choose freely, who was honest enough to warn her about his own failings. I think, she said slowly, that difficult, complicated people might be exactly right for each other. Alexander's smile could have lit London. Does that mean you'll keep courting me? It means I'll think about it, Charlotte said, but she was smiling too. Ask me again tomorrow. I'll ask you every tomorrow until you say yes, Alexander promised. As Charlotte entered her father's house, heart racing and mind spinning, she realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in 16 years, since that golden summer when anything seemed possible, she felt seen, known, valued for exactly who she was. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The scandal broke 3 days later at the Pembridge Ball. Charlotte attended on Alexander's arm, their third public appearance together, and London society was abuzz with speculation. The frozen Duke had finally chosen someone, and his choice was puzzling. Lady Charlotte Pemberton was neither breathtakingly beautiful nor particularly accomplished by society's standards. She had no fortune, no influential connections, and a reputation for being rather too opinionated. What could the Duke possibly see in her? Charlotte overheard the whispers as Alexander led her into the ballroom. She kept her head high, refusing to show how each cutting remark landed. Perhaps it's charity, Lady Pemberton murmured to her companion, loud enough to be heard. The poor dear's family is quite ruined, you know. The Duke must feel sorry for her. Or perhaps, Miss Catherine Worth suggested with false sweetness, she's entrapped him somehow. They knew each other as children. Perhaps she's using that connection to manipulate him. Alexander's hand tightened on Charlotte's arm. Ignore them, he said quietly. They're jealous and small-minded. They're right, though, Charlotte whispered. About my family's situation. About my lack of accomplishments. Why would you choose me when you could have anyone? Because everyone else is unbearably tedious, Alexander said. But before he could elaborate, Charlotte's stepmother appeared, her face flushed with wine and malice. Charlotte, she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. How kind of His Grace to escort you this evening. Though I must say, dear, you're monopolizing his attention rather selfishly. Surely other young ladies deserve the Duke's notice as well. It was a calculated strike, making Charlotte appear grasping and possessive in front of everyone. Lady Pemberton, Alexander said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet that made Charlotte's stepmother pale slightly. Miss Charlotte has my attention because I've chosen to give it to her. I don't require management of my social engagements. Thank you. Charlotte's stepmother recovered quickly, her smile turning sharp. Of course, Your Grace. I simply worry about Charlotte's reputation. People are saying such unkind things about this sudden courtship. About the timing, given our family's recent financial difficulties. What people are saying, a new voice interrupted, is absolutely fascinating. Everyone turned to see Lord Edmund Hartwick, Charlotte's father, approaching with an expression Charlotte had never seen before. Cold, furious determination. Edmund, Charlotte's stepmother said, her confidence faltering. You were just publicly humiliating our daughter while spreading lies about His Grace's intentions, Charlotte's father said flatly. I've had enough, Constance. The ballroom had gone quiet around them, every ear straining to hear this unexpected confrontation. Papa, Charlotte whispered. What are you doing? Her father turned to her, his expression softening. I'm doing what I should have done years ago, my dear. I'm protecting you. He looked at Alexander. Your Grace, might we speak privately? All of us, you, Charlotte, and myself. Alexander nodded immediately. Of course, my lord. They withdrew to a small antechamber off the main ballroom, leaving Charlotte's stepmother fuming among the whispers. Once the door closed, Charlotte's father seemed to age 10 years, his shoulders sagging under some invisible weight. I need to tell you both something, he said quietly. Something I should have revealed long ago. Charlotte felt a dreadful pool in her stomach. Papa, what is it? When your mother died, her father began, his voice rough with emotion. I was lost, completely lost. She was everything to me, Charlotte. My love, my compass, my reason for existing. And when she died, I made a terrible mistake. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking far older than his 50 years. I remarried too quickly, to a woman I didn't love who didn't love me, because I couldn't bear the silence of being alone. I told myself it was for you, that you needed a mother. But truthfully, I was just a coward. Papa, let me finish, her father interrupted gently. Constance married me for money and position. I married her to fill a void. It was a transaction from the beginning, and you paid the price for our mutual selfishness. She resented you because you reminded her that I'd never love her the way I loved your mother. And I failed to protect you because I was drowning in my own grief. Tears streamed down Charlotte's cheeks. You didn't fail me. I did, her father said firmly. I let her be cruel to you. I let her diminish you, dismiss your intelligence, make you feel unwanted in your own home. I told myself it was easier to keep the peace than to fight. But Charlotte, you deserved better. You deserved a father who stood up for you. Alexander had remained silent during this confession, but now he moved to stand beside Charlotte, his presence solid and supportive. Why are you telling me this now? Charlotte asked. Because 3 days ago, His Grace came to see me, her father said, looking at Alexander with something like respect. He told me everything, about how he's loved you since childhood, about his plans to secure our debts regardless of whether you accepted him, about the reports he'd commissioned to ensure your safety and well-being over the years. Charlotte's head snapped toward Alexander. You told him? I told him because I wanted him to understand my intentions, Alexander said quietly. I didn't want him thinking I was taking advantage of your family's situation. And I realized, Charlotte's father continued, That this man, this Duke who could have anyone, loves my daughter the way I loved her mother, completely, unconditionally, the way she deserves to be loved. He stood, moving to take Charlotte's hands. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something, my dear. You don't have to marry His Grace out of duty or gratitude or to save the family. The debts are resolved. Hartwick Hall is secure. You're free to choose purely based on what your heart wants. But Constance said. Constance has been lying, her father said flatly. About the extent of our debts, about the urgency of your marriage, about everything. She wanted you married off quickly to anyone who'd take you so she could secure her own position. But thanks to His Grace, she no longer has that power. Charlotte looked between her father and Alexander, trying to process everything she just learned. You've been working together? For 3 days, yes, her father confirmed. Untangling my finances, removing Constance's access to the estate accounts, and preparing to make a rather dramatic announcement. What announcement? That I'm divorcing your stepmother and legally ensuring she receives only what she brought into the marriage, which amounts to very little. It will be scandalous, of course. Divorce always is. But I've spent 16 years in a loveless marriage to spare myself the scandal. I'm done letting fear of society's opinion dictate my choices. He squeezed Charlotte's hands gently. And I'm done letting it dictate yours. If you want to marry the Duke, marry him because you love him, not because you think you must. And if you don't want to marry him, don't. Either way, you have my support and protection. Charlotte felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Everything she'd believed about her situation, about her father's weakness, about Alexander's motivations. All of it was more complicated than she'd understood. Papa, she whispered, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet, her father said. Think about it. Decide what you truly want, free from obligation or expectation. He turned to Alexander. Your Grace, I'm grateful for your assistance with my debts, but I want to be absolutely clear. My daughter's hand is not payment for your generosity. If Charlotte chooses you, it will be because she wants you, not because she owes you. I wouldn't have it any other way, Alexander said firmly. After her father left, Charlotte and Alexander stood alone in the antechamber, the sounds of the ball filtering through the door. Music, laughter, the oblivious chatter of society continuing while Charlotte's world realigned itself. You could have told me, Charlotte said finally, not looking at Alexander, about working with my father, about securing the debts. Would you have believed it wasn't manipulation? Alexander asked quietly. Would you have trusted that I wasn't using your family's situation to pressure you into accepting me? Charlotte was silent because he was right. She would have questioned his motives, would have wondered if his professed love was genuine or merely a convenient excuse to acquire a wife while appearing noble. I wanted you to choose me freely, Alexander continued, without any pressure, financial or otherwise. Your father agreed to keep it quiet until we were certain the situation was truly resolved. And now it's resolved. Now it's resolved. Your father can divorce your stepmother without risking financial ruin. Hartwick Hall is secure. And you, Charlotte, are free to choose whatever life you want. Charlotte finally looked at him. At this man who'd loved her for 16 years, who'd watched from afar and never approached until he was certain he could offer her true freedom of choice. What if what I want is impossible? What do you want? Alexander asked, his gray eyes intense. I want that summer back, Charlotte said, her voice breaking. I want to be 8 years old again, before my mother dies, before everything becomes complicated. I want to sit in that oak tree eating stolen biscuits and believing that growing up means being happy. Charlotte, but I can't have that, she continued. None of us can go back. We're both different people now, damaged by loss and disappointment and 16 years of loneliness. How can we possibly build something real on the foundation of a childhood memory? Alexander moved closer, his hands coming up to gently frame her face. We can't build it on memory alone, he agreed. But Charlotte, that summer wasn't just a memory. It was proof. Proof that genuine connection exists, that authentic love is possible. That two people can see each other completely and choose to stay. His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. You're right that we're both damaged. I'm suspicious and guarded. You're defensive and convinced you're not enough. We both learned to protect ourselves by not letting anyone too close. But Charlotte, what if we stopped protecting ourselves from each other? What if we chose to be as honest and real as we were at 8 years old? People will say I'm marrying you for money, Charlotte whispered. People will say many things. Most of them are wrong. They'll say you're making a terrible match, choosing someone without beauty or accomplishment. Then they're blind. Alexander's voice was fierce. Charlotte, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever known. Not because of your face, though I find you lovely, but because of who you are. The way your mind works, the passion with which you defend your beliefs, the kindness you show to children who have nothing, the strength it takes to be yourself in a world that demands conformity. That's beauty. That's an accomplishment. Everything else is just decoration. I'm afraid, Charlotte admitted. I'm afraid of choosing wrong, of disappointing you, of this not working and having to live with the consequences forever. Then don't choose forever, Alexander said. Not yet. Marry me, Charlotte, but marry me for 6 months first. A trial period. If at the end of 6 months you're unhappy, if you regret your choice, I'll have the marriage quietly annulled. You'll keep a generous settlement, enough to live independently anywhere you choose. No scandal, no consequences, just your freedom returned. Charlotte stared at him. That's not legal. Annulments require specific grounds. I have excellent lawyers and sufficient money to create whatever grounds are necessary, Alexander said. I'm serious, Charlotte. I'm so certain that you'll choose to stay that I'm willing to risk everything on a trial period. 6 months to decide if this is what you want, truly want, without any pressure or obligation. Why would you offer that? Because I love you, Alexander said simply. And love without freedom isn't love at all. It's possession. I don't want to possess you, Charlotte. I want to be chosen by you, every single day, because you want me as much as I want you. Charlotte felt something crack open in her chest, some protective wall she'd built around her heart. This man, this impossible man, was offering her everything she'd never dared to dream of. Love without conditions, respect without performance, freedom within commitment. Ask me, she whispered. Alexander's eyes widened. What? Ask me properly. Here, now, in this ridiculous antechamber while London society gossips 20 feet away. Ask me to marry you. A smile spread across Alexander's face, transforming his usually severe expression into something radiant. He dropped to one knee, heedless of the expensive fabric of his evening clothes, and took both her hands in his. Lady Charlotte Pemberton, he said, his voice rough with emotion, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Will you argue with me about agricultural reform and teach me to see the world through your brilliant mind? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you deserve to be loved exactly as you are? Yes, Charlotte said, tears streaming freely now. Yes, Alexander. I'll marry you. He stood and pulled her into his arms, propriety abandoned, and kissed her with 16 years of longing and love and desperate relief. Charlotte kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope and tentative joy into the connection between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. 6 months, he reminded her softly. And if at the end of that time you want to leave, I won't, Charlotte interrupted. I'm terrified and confused and still not entirely certain this is real. But Alexander, I'm choosing you. Not because I have to, not because it's convenient, but because for the first time in 16 years, I feel like I've come home. Home, Alexander repeated, testing the word, then smiled. Yes, that's exactly right. Welcome home, Lottie. They returned to the ballroom hand in hand, and the whispers started immediately. Charlotte's disheveled hair and tear-stained face combined with Alexander's rumpled evening clothes told their own story. Charlotte's stepmother pushed through the crowd, her face twisted with fury. Charlotte, what have you done? The scandal. Lady Pemberton, Alexander interrupted, his voice cutting through the noise with ducal authority. I suggest you compose yourself. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene? Constance sputtered. Your Grace, my stepdaughter has obviously manipulated you. Enough. The single word cracked like a whip, and the entire ballroom fell silent. Alexander's expression was cold, every inch the powerful duke who commanded respect and obedience. You've spent years diminishing Charlotte, making her feel unwanted and inadequate. That ends now. He turned to address the assembled crowd, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement. Lady Charlotte Pemberton has agreed to become my Duchess. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Charlotte's stepmother looked like she might faint. Lady Pemberton's mouth hung open in shock. I know many of you are confused, Alexander continued, his hand firm on Charlotte's waist. You're wondering what the Duke of Ashford could possibly see in an unremarkable young lady with no fortune and a reputation for being too opinionated. Charlotte felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Alexander's grip tightened reassuringly. Let me clarify, Alexander said, his voice hardening. Lady Charlotte is the most remarkable woman I've ever known. She's brilliant, compassionate, honest to a fault, and brave enough to be herself in a world that demands women be decorative and silent. Those qualities, intelligence, integrity, courage, are what I value, what I've always valued. He looked down at Charlotte, his expression softening. I've loved this woman since we were children. I've watched her grow into someone extraordinary despite every attempt to diminish her. And I consider myself the luckiest man in England that she's agreed to marry me. But the scandal, someone murmured. Lord Hartwick's debts are resolved, Charlotte's father said, stepping forward to stand beside his daughter. Thanks to his Grace's generosity, yes, but not contingent on this marriage. Charlotte is marrying the Duke because she chooses to, not because she's obligated to. And her stepmother? Lady Pemberton asked archly. What is Lady Constance's position in all this? Lady Constance, Charlotte's father said coldly, will no longer have a position. I'm filing for divorce on grounds of financial malfeasance and cruelty. The proceedings will be public and, yes, scandalous. But I'm done protecting my own reputation at my daughter's expense. The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers. Divorce was rare among the aristocracy, and when it happened, it destroyed reputations. For an earl to publicly announce such proceedings was unprecedented. Constance's face went white, then red. Edmund, you cannot be serious. The scandal will ruin us both. You've already ruined yourself, Edmund said flatly. Stealing from estate accounts, lying about our financial situation, systematically abusing my daughter for years. I have documentation of everything, Constance. Your choices have consequences. This is outrageous, Constance hissed. I'll fight this. I'll expose every secret this family has. Please do, Alexander said mildly. I'm curious what secrets you think you possess that would concern me. My investigators have been quite thorough in documenting your activities, Lady Constance. Would you like me to share their findings with everyone present? The threat hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Constance opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and fled the ballroom, her elegant composure finally shattered. In the silence that followed, Charlotte became aware of every eye fixed on her, judging, evaluating, recalculating her worth now that a duke had publicly claimed her. They're still whispering, she murmured to Alexander. Let them, he said, loud enough for nearby listeners to hear. Their opinions matter less than nothing to me. Charlotte, look at me. She looked up, and his gray eyes held hers with fierce intensity. You are enough, he said clearly, his words carrying across the ballroom. You have always been enough. Every person in this room who made you feel otherwise was wrong. Do you believe me? Charlotte felt tears threatening again. I'm trying to. Then let me help. Alexander released her waist and took both her hands, holding them up so their joined hands were visible to everyone watching. I, Alexander Thornfield, Duke of Ashford, am proud beyond measure to marry Lady Charlotte Pemberton. Not despite her intelligence and opinions and refusal to conform, but because of those very qualities. She makes me better. She makes life interesting. She makes me want to be worthy of her rather than expecting her to be worthy of me. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture both tender and possessive. And if anyone here has a problem with my choice, they're welcome to take it up with me directly. I promise you'll find me remarkably unsympathetic to your concerns. The ballroom remained silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, Lord Edmund began to clap. Slowly, other guests joined in. Some genuinely happy, others simply unwilling to offend a powerful duke. That was terrifying, Charlotte whispered as the applause swelled around them. That was necessary, Alexander corrected. They needed to understand that you're under my protection now. That insulting you means insulting me. You didn't have to be quite so dramatic about it. I absolutely did. Alexander smiled slightly. Charlotte, I've spent 16 years being diplomatically non-committal about everything. It felt remarkably good to be completely, publicly certain about something for once. As the ball resumed around them, couples returning to the dance floor and conversations shifting to the scandalous events they just witnessed, Alexander led Charlotte toward the terrace doors. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere quieter. You've had enough public spectacle for one evening. They slipped outside into the cool night air, leaving behind the music and gossip. The terrace overlooked a garden lit by lanterns, creating pools of golden light in the darkness. Are you all right? Alexander asked gently. That was rather intense. Charlotte laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. Intense? Alexander, you just publicly declared your love for me. My father announced his divorce, and my stepmother fled in disgrace. Intense seems inadequate. Fair point. He pulled her closer, his arms around her waist. But it's done now. No more secrets, no more pretending. Everyone knows we're engaged, and more importantly, everyone knows why. Because you're apparently obsessed with me, Charlotte said. But there was no heat in it. Desperately obsessed, Alexander agreed cheerfully. Have been for 16 years. Likely will be for 16 more. You should probably get used to it. Charlotte looked up at him, at this man who'd kept a childhood promise and somehow turned it into something real and lasting. I'm still afraid, she admitted. I'm afraid of disappointing you, of not being the Duchess everyone expects, of making a mistake that can't be unmade. Then we'll make mistakes together, Alexander said. Charlotte, I'm not expecting perfection. I'm expecting you, opinionated, argumentative, brilliant you. That's all I've ever wanted. What if that's not enough? It will always be enough. He cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. Do you remember what we promised each other in that oak tree? That we'd build a home where people could be themselves. No pretending, no performing. Charlotte nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. That's what I'm offering you, Alexander continued. A home where you never have to pretend, where your intelligence is celebrated, not hidden, where your opinions matter and your dreams are supported. A partnership, Charlotte, not a performance. That's what I want, Charlotte whispered. More than anything. Then take it, Alexander said. Take me. Take this chance. We'll figure out the rest together. Charlotte rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring all her fear and hope and tentative certainty into the connection. Alexander kissed her back with 16 years of longing and patience and absolute devotion. When they finally pulled apart, Charlotte rested her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. 6 months, she said quietly. You promised me 6 months to be certain. 6 months, Alexander confirmed. Though I'm already certain you won't want to leave. Arrogant. Confident, he corrected. There's a difference. They stood together in the garden, wrapped in each other and the knowledge that everything had changed. Tomorrow there would be consequences to face. Scandal from her father's divorce, gossip about their sudden engagement, her stepmother's fury. But tonight, for this moment, Charlotte allowed herself to simply feel joy. Alexander, she said softly, Thank you for waiting, for keeping that promise, for seeing me when everyone else looked through me. Charlotte? He replied, his arms tightening around her. Yes. Thank you for being exactly who you are, for never pretending, for being brave enough to choose me back. They returned to the ballroom eventually, facing the curiosity and whispers with joined hands and unwavering certainty. Let society talk. Let them question and gossip and judge. Charlotte had spent her entire adult life caring what others thought, diminishing herself to fit their expectations. No more. She was engaged to the Duke of Ashford, and he loved her exactly as she was. That was all that mattered. The morning of their 6-month anniversary, Charlotte woke in the ducal estate in Yorkshire to find Alexander already awake, watching her with that same intense focus he'd had since childhood. "What are you doing?" she mumbled sleepily. "Admiring my wife," Alexander said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm allowed to do that now." "You've been allowed to do that for 6 months, Charlotte pointed out. "You'd think the novelty would have worn off." "Never." He kissed her forehead gently. "Happy anniversary, Lottie." Charlotte sat up, suddenly nervous despite 6 months of marriage. The 6-month deadline. "Your offer is still valid," Alexander said seriously. "If you want to leave, if you've been unhappy, I'll arrange everything exactly as I promised. No questions, no consequences." Charlotte studied his face, seeing the same vulnerability she'd seen that night in the antechamber at the Pembridge ball. He meant it. Even now, after 6 months of marriage, of partnership, of building a life together, he was still offering her freedom. "You're an idiot," she said fondly. Alexander blinked. "I beg your pardon? You're an idiot if you think I'm leaving." Charlotte moved to straddle his lap, framing his face with her hands. "Alexander, these past 6 months have been the happiest of my life. Yes, we've argued about agricultural reform and estate management and whether your study really needs quite so many books. But we've also laughed and talked and built something real together. You're staying." The hope in his voice made her heart ache. "I'm staying, not because I'm obligated to, not because of your title or wealth, but because you're my best friend, Alexander. Just like you were when we were 8 years old. Except now I get to be married to my best friend, which is considerably better." Alexander pulled her down into a kiss that started gentle and quickly became heated. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said quietly. "I've loved you for 16 years and 6 months. Probably longer if I'm honest." "I love you too," Charlotte replied, "which still terrifies me sometimes, but in a good way." "What changed?" Alexander asked. "I know you were frightened at the beginning. What made you certain?" Charlotte considered the question. "Do you remember the tenant dispute? 2 months ago?" Alexander groaned. "When you went behind my back to meet with the farmers directly because you thought I was being too harsh?" "You were being too harsh," Charlotte said unapologetically. "They needed support, not lectures about responsibility. Anyway, do you remember what you did when you found out I'd countermanded your decisions?" "I was furious," Alexander admitted. "Then we had that massive argument in your study." "You were furious," Charlotte agreed. "But Alexander, you listened. You actually listened to my perspective, considered my points, and then changed your position. You admitted I was right even though it undermined your authority." "Because you were right," Alexander said. "The tenants did need support. I'd been approaching it wrong." "Exactly," Charlotte smiled. "That's when I knew. That's when I understood that you meant what you said about partnership. You don't just pay lip service to respecting my intelligence, you actually do it. Even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable." "Of course I do. Why wouldn't I?" "Because most men don't," Charlotte said bluntly. "Most men want wives who are decorative and agreeable. They say they value intelligence until that intelligence challenges them. But you, Alexander, you actively seek out my challenges. You want me to argue with you." "I do," Alexander agreed. "Life would be unbearably boring otherwise." They spent the morning in bed, talking and laughing and making love with the easy comfort of people who'd grown to truly know each other. Charlotte had discovered that Alexander was unexpectedly playful in private, that the severe Duke of Ashford became someone looser and younger when they were alone. Later, dressed and somewhat presentable, they walked through the Yorkshire estate grounds. It was nothing like London, wild and windswept, with rolling hills and stone walls and sheep dotting the landscape. "This is where I grew up," Alexander said as they climbed a hill overlooking the valley. "After my father died, I spent most of my time here instead of London. Society felt suffocating. But here I could breathe." "I can see why," Charlotte said, taking in the vast openness. "It's beautiful." "It's home," Alexander corrected. "Or it is now that you're here." They reached the crest of the hill and Charlotte stopped, staring at the structure before them. "Alexander," she whispered, "what is this?" "A fortress," he said, his voice warm with amusement. "Remember? We promised to build one." It wasn't an actual fortress, of course. It was a small stone cottage restored and expanded, with a tower on one corner that gave it a faintly medieval air. Whimsical and charming and absolutely impractical. "You built this?" Charlotte asked, stunned. "I started it when I was 18, Alexander admitted. "Right after my father died. I was lost and angry and didn't know what to do with all the grief. I remembered our promise that we'd build a fortress where we could be ourselves. So I started building." He led her inside, and Charlotte discovered a space that was part library, part studio, part retreat. Books lined every wall. There was a massive fireplace, comfortable furniture, and enormous windows overlooking the valley. "I've been working on it for 14 years, Alexander said quietly, "adding to it whenever I was in Yorkshire, preparing it for you even though I didn't know if I'd ever find you again. It's yours, Charlotte, our fortress, a place where you can draw and read and argue with me about philosophy without anyone judging or expecting you to be something you're not." Charlotte felt tears streaming down her face. "You're going to make me cry on our anniversary. Happy tears, I hope?" Devastatingly happy tears. She turned to face him, this man who'd kept a childhood promise in ways she'd never imagined. "Alexander, I don't know what I did to deserve you." "You were yourself," Alexander said simply. "That's all you ever had to do, Lottie. Just be yourself." They spent the afternoon in the fortress, christening it properly by making love in front of the fire, then talking for hours about their plans. The school Charlotte wanted to establish for teaching girls from tenant families, the agricultural reforms Alexander hoped to implement, the family they might someday have. "I want daughters," Charlotte announced. "At least 3. Smart, opinionated girls who grow up knowing their thoughts matter." "And sons?" Alexander asked, amused. "Sons are fine too, I suppose, as long as you teach them to respect women's intelligence." "Obviously." Alexander pulled her closer. "What else do you want, Charlotte? For our life together?" Charlotte considered. "I want what we have now. Partnership, honesty, the freedom to be myself without apology. And I want you, exactly as you are. Obsessive and protective and surprisingly silly when no one else is watching." "I'm not silly," Alexander protested. "You made shadow puppets on the wall last week to make me laugh. That was a sophisticated artistic expression. You made a rabbit eating a carrot." "A very sophisticated rabbit," Alexander maintained, but he was smiling. As the sun set over the Yorkshire moors, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, Charlotte reflected on the past 6 months. They hadn't been perfect. She and Alexander had argued about everything from estate management to where to hang paintings. But they'd been real, honest, the kind of partnership she'd never dared to dream possible. "Alexander," she said quietly. Thank you for giving me the choice, for the 6-month deadline and the option to leave. But mostly thank you for building a life worth staying for." "Thank you for staying," Alexander replied, his arms tightening around her. "Thank you for choosing me, even when you were afraid. Thank you for being brave enough to believe in us." They returned to the main house as darkness fell, walking hand in hand through grounds that Charlotte now thought of as home. The servants greeted them warmly, No longer the uncertain woman who'd arrived 6 months ago, but the Duchess of Ashford, who'd won them over with genuine interest in their lives and refusal to stand in ceremony. That evening, they hosted a small dinner party. Charlotte's father, who was noticeably happier since his divorce. Several estate managers and their families. Local gentry who'd become genuine friends. It was nothing like London society dinners, all pretense and performance. This was real people having real conversations, and Charlotte loved every moment. After the guests departed, Charlotte and Alexander sat in the library of the main house, her feet in his lap as he absently massaged them, both reading in comfortable silence. "This is my favorite part of the day," Alexander said suddenly. Charlotte looked up from her book. "What is this?" "You and me just existing together. No expectations, no performance. Just us." "I love you," Charlotte said, the words coming easier now than they had 6 months ago. "I love that you value quiet moments as much as grand gestures. I love that you respect my intelligence and challenge my ideas. I love that you kept a promise for 16 years even when it seemed impossible." "I love you too," Alexander replied. "I love your brilliant mind and your terrible temper and your complete inability to pretend. I love that you teach tenant children to read and argue with me about politics and once punched your stepbrother for his idiocy." "He really did deserve it," Charlotte muttered. "He absolutely did." Alexander pulled her onto his lap, settling her comfortably against him. "We're going to be happy, Charlotte. Not perfect. We'll argue and disagree and occasionally drive each other mad. But we'll be happy." "We already are happy," Charlotte corrected. "That's the remarkable part. This isn't some future possibility. This is now." "Now," Alexander agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And tomorrow and every day after." 5 years later, Charlotte stood in the garden of the Yorkshire estate, watching their 3 children play in the afternoon sun. Margaret, 4 years old, was attempting to teach her younger brothers, Thomas and James, twins, naturally, about beetles, a family obsession that had apparently passed through generations. "They're absolutely filthy," Alexander observed, appearing beside her with 2 cups of tea. "They're exploring," Charlotte corrected, accepting her cup. "There's a difference." "Mummy," Margaret called, running toward them with something clutched in her chubby hands. "Look what I found." Charlotte knelt to examine the offering, a particularly large beetle that Margaret held with careful reverence. "That's a stag beetle," Charlotte said seriously. "They're quite rare. You're very lucky to have found one." "Can I keep him?" Margaret asked hopefully. "Beetles need to live outside where they can eat and find mates," Charlotte explained. "But we can draw him in your journal before you release him." Margaret considered this, then nodded with 4-year-old solemnity. "That's fair." As Margaret returned to her brothers, carefully showing them her discovery, Alexander wrapped his arms around Charlotte's waist from behind. "You're an excellent mother," he murmured against her ear. "You're an excellent father," Charlotte replied. "Though I notice you didn't volunteer to handle the beetle drawing session. That's because your drawings are superior to mine and Margaret has standards." Charlotte laughed, leaning back against him. "Did you finish the school plans?" "Just now. The architect confirmed we can begin construction next month. By next autumn, we'll have a proper school for every child on the estate, regardless of gender or family income." It had been Charlotte's dream since their marriage, a school where tenant children could receive real education, not just basic literacy. Alexander had supported it enthusiastically, even when other landowners called it radical nonsense. "Your father sent a letter," Alexander said. "He's bringing his new companion to visit next month." Charlotte smiled. Her father had started courting a widow last year, a kind woman named Eleanor who shared his love of history and made him laugh. After years of loneliness following his divorce from Constance, Edmund had found genuine happiness again. "That's wonderful. Margaret will be thrilled. She adores Eleanor. Your father also mentioned that Constance remarried to a wealthy merchant in America." Charlotte felt nothing at the news, no anger, no satisfaction, just indifference. Constance had left England shortly after the divorce, Using what little money she'd managed to retain to start over somewhere, her scandal wouldn't follow. "I hope she's happy," Charlotte said honestly. "We all deserve that. Even people who were cruel to you? Especially people who were cruel to me. Holding grudges is exhausting, Alexander. I'd rather spend my energy on building something good than maintaining bitterness about the past." Alexander kissed her temple. "Have I mentioned recently that I'm in awe of you?" "Not since this morning," Charlotte said lightly. "You're getting lazy in your devotion." "Lazy?" Alexander spun her around to face him. "I'll have you know I've spent the past 5 years being devastatingly devoted." "Only 5 years? What about the 16 before that?" "Those don't count. I was pining from afar like some ridiculous gothic hero." Charlotte laughed, the sound bright and free. "You were rather gothic about it. All that brooding and watching from the shadows. I prefer to think of it as romantic dedication. Whatever helps you sleep at night, Your Grace." Their playful banter was interrupted by Thomas crying. He'd apparently fallen and scraped his knee. Charlotte and Alexander moved as a team, Charlotte scooping up the sobbing twin, while Alexander checked the injury and declared it superficial. "You're very brave," Alexander told Thomas seriously. "Would you like to help me examine that beetle your sister found? I think it might be the same type of beetle I used to collect as a boy." Thomas's tears stopped immediately, fascination replacing pain. "Really, Papa? Really? Come on, let's go investigate." As Alexander led all 3 children toward the fortress cottage, which had become their favorite play space, Charlotte felt overwhelming gratitude. This life, this family, this partnership, it was everything she'd never dared to dream possible. That evening, after the children were bathed and storied and finally asleep, Charlotte and Alexander retreated to the library. 5 years of marriage had only deepened their connection. They still argued about everything, but now those arguments were punctuated with laughter and resolved with compromise. "Do you ever think about that night?" Charlotte asked, curled against Alexander on the sofa. "At the Pembridge ball, when everything changed?" "I think about it constantly," Alexander admitted. "How terrified I was that you'd reject me. How certain I was that I'd somehow ruin everything. I was terrified too. I kept waiting for you to realize I wasn't worth all the effort." Alexander pulled her closer. "And now I know better. Not because I suddenly believe I'm remarkable. I still struggle with that. But because you've shown me, every single day for 5 years, that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being known completely and chosen anyway." "We chose well, didn't we?" Alexander said quietly. "We chose each other," Charlotte corrected. "That makes all the difference." Later, in bed, with moonlight streaming through the windows and Alexander's arms around her, Charlotte reflected on how profoundly her life had changed. She'd gone from being the overlooked daughter of a failing earl to the Duchess of Ashford, from believing she'd never belong anywhere to finding home in this man's embrace. "Charlotte," Alexander murmured sleepily. Do you remember what you said when I asked you to marry me? About difficult, complicated people being right for each other." "Yes, you were correct. We're both difficult. But we're difficult in complementary ways. Your stubbornness balances my rigidity. My patience tempers your impulsiveness. We make each other better." Charlotte smiled in the darkness. "Are you about to get sentimental, Your Grace?" "Devastatingly sentimental," Alexander confirmed. "You should prepare yourself." "I'm prepared. I'm grateful," Alexander said, his voice roughening with emotion. "That 8-year-old me was brave enough to promise to come back for you. I'm grateful that 18-year-old me was stubborn enough to build a fortress while waiting. And I'm grateful that 32-year-old me was patient enough to court you properly instead of rushing." "I'm grateful too," Charlotte whispered, "for all of it. Even the painful parts, because they led here. To this moment, to every moment, to a life where I can be myself without apology. To partnership and passion and 3 children who will hopefully inherit your patience and my sense of justice. And possibly your terrible temper," Alexander added. "My temper isn't terrible. It's appropriately responsive to stupidity." Alexander laughed, the sound warm and content. "There's my argumentative Duchess. Forever and always," Charlotte promised. As they drifted towards sleep, wrapped in each other and the life they'd built together, Charlotte thought about that terrified girl at the Pembridge ball, certain she was making a catastrophic mistake. She wished she could tell that girl what she knew now, that sometimes the most terrifying choices lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. That love, real love, isn't about perfection or performance. It's about being known completely and chosen anyway. It's about partnership and patience and the courage to be vulnerable with another person. It's about a boy who kept a promise for 16 years and a girl who was brave enough to believe him. Charlotte Thornfield, Duchess of Ashford, fell asleep in her husband's arms, surrounded by evidence of a life well lived. Children sleeping down the hall, a school being built for tenant families, an estate thriving under their joint management, and most importantly, a love that had started with a childhood promise and grown into something neither of them could have imagined. The wine stain on the tablecloth from that first dinner had been impossible to remove. Charlotte had insisted they keep it anyway, a reminder that disasters can become beginnings, and that sometimes the most elegant moments in life come from spectacular awkwardness. She'd spilled wine on her future husband. He'd said 3 words that changed everything. "It's quite all right." But the words that really mattered came later. "I believe you. I choose you. I love you." And finally, the words they'd both spent a lifetime waiting to say, "Welcome home."